Welcome to Enlightened, the enlightened journey of life. I am your host, Jen Hamilton, and it is an honor to have you here. I am a conscious life coach and women's empowerment mentor, and I activate a potent level of self and soul inquiry with my clients, which initiates deep and lasting transformation in all areas of their lives. I am here for the full human experience, authentically and audaciously sharing my magic with the world. On this podcast, we're all about mastering life on the way to enlightenment. And as we are here having a human experience, we might as well embrace it all. We play in the space of what is real and tangible, just as much as we play in the space of esoteric and metaphysical. You'll be ignited by deep conversation, whether through my own personal musings, interviews with incredible thought leaders around the world, and everyday divine humans sharing their soulful stories. Thank you for being on this journey. Let's dive in. Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to the Enlightened podcast. I am your host, Jen Hamilton, and today I want to talk and just really speak into the power of intention. Now, it was my old mate Buddha that says, what you think, you become. What you feel, you attract, and what you imagine, you create. Now, if you've listened to the episode where I talk about my journey through NLP, and I talk about the subconscious mind, you'll have a bit of an understanding, how our mind works. All of the pieces of information that come into our minds form our subconscious mind. And our conscious mind is only 10% of the access that we have to all of the pieces of information and the data that's stored in there. And what I really want to speak into today is intention, because intention is literally everything. And when we can start to grasp the fact that our whole reality has been created through our intention, it's kind of mind-blowing. Now, if you're sitting there going, come on, Jen, I've had a really shit time. I've just been through a breakup. My bank account's sitting at zero. I've just lost my job. All of these things that could be going on. First of all, honey, I feel for you. I'm really, really sorry that you're going through that. And things can absolutely be turned around once you realize that the power of intention and that the power of the mind has created the situation that you're in and can absolutely uncreate the situation that you're in. And you can have a whole different experience of life. So the really beautiful thing about our minds is we have this thing called mind plasticity, where we are not stuck in our thoughts. We can create new neural pathways and change our mindset about a lot of things. And when we start to bring awareness to our thoughts, which we can do, whether we're in quiet time, whether we're journaling, whether we're in meditation, when we have awareness of our thoughts, we can start to take stock of what's going on in our mind, and we can start to realize that our minds are literally just creating our version of reality, and it's all playing out before us. Now, whether you've seen the movie or documentary, The Secret, from many, many years ago, that very much spoke into a very basic version of the law of attraction. And there were a couple of gaps in it. It was almost like, just imagine a new bike turns up at your door, and then you open the door and then a new bike turns up at your door. And you know what, for some people that might actually happen, but there's also the human experience that says, hey, there's time and space in between our thoughts and intentions and then things coming to fruition. So things don't necessarily appear all at once. But what we can start to understand when we start to take stock of our lives is how our thoughts and our intentions really have created the incredible life that we do live. And it's interesting because I hear from, especially a lot of my clients, I hear a lot about what they don't want in their life, what's going wrong for them, what they're really trying to move away from. And I asked them the question, well, what is it that you do want? And the thing about the brain and the mind is, even though it is exceptionally intelligent, it can't actually determine based on your words what it is that you do want and what it is that you don't want. It will hear the key words. So say, for example, I don't want to be overweight anymore. Okay, all it's hearing is overweight, and there is a lot of intention going into the feeling of being overweight. And so not only are we co-creating, with our minds, but we're co-creating with our feelings that we're putting into things as well. So if you're constantly thinking, I don't want to be overweight, and overweight being the key word there, you're actually feeling what it feels like to be overweight. You're putting thoughts and intentions and energy into the word overweight. And ultimately, that's what you're only going to experience and see more of. What we want to start to do is change our language towards the things that we do want to experience or that we do want to feel. So say, for example, someone was coming to me and they said, oh, I don't want to be overweight anymore. I say, well, what is it that you do want? Oh, well, I want to have more energy and I want to be stronger and, slimmer in my body. That's what it is that we want to start to focus on. We want to focus on what it is that you do want, and as opposed to what it is that you don't want. So I teach this in one of my programs, Unearth Goddess. It's called the Towards and Away Motivation. And it's actually a game changer, because when you start to realize that everything that you're thinking, that you're feeling is creating the reality around you, you can absolutely play in this field. And this is what we call playing in the quantum field. When you start to realize that you have control over your thoughts and that you can create anything ultimately that you desire. Like I said, it might not come to fruition straight away. Sometimes, there is a timeline involved. But if you bring all of your thoughts, your intentions, and your feelings channeled into one thing, then it's absolutely going to come into fruition for you. And that's what we call manifesting. And there's so much thrown out there in the world. There's so much out there around manifesting and do this, don't do that, all of that. And you'll find your groove if you're quite new to manifesting. You may have seen The Secret or things along, a similar line where it talks about writing down what it is that you do want, being in that energy essentially. But we also want to come into a state of awareness in our own minds, because if we have a deeply ingrained belief system that we are not worthy of receiving the very thing that it is that we're trying to create, we're going to create a block. And this can run really, really deep. Okay, so you might have had an experience as a child where someone said that you couldn't have a toy, for example. Or someone promised you something and it didn't come to fruition, you didn't get it. A belief system is starting to be created from a young age to say that if I ask for something and I don't get it, there's no point in asking, or I'm going to get reprimanded for asking, or, whatever the experience is that you are having. And so there might be a deeply ingrained belief system that says I am not worthy of having, what it is that I want. And this could be really basic things as well. I've worked with a lot of people that have experienced eating disordered or just general disordered eating. And, when we trace back, down to their childhood, just really starting to notice the relationship that they had with food and the relationship that their family members had with food. It's really interesting to see their behavioral patterns that have formed around food. So I'll give you an example of this. Say, for example, like as a child, on a Friday night, we'd have a family tradition where we'd have fish and chips for dinner, and Dad would cook dim sims. We'll do some fried dim sims, and we'd watch Gardening Australia, and that was our thing. And then back in those days, in the 90s, there was no Netflix back then. There was only channels 7, 9, and 10 that had movies on a Friday night. So we'd all sit around on the couch and watch a movie together, and generally we'd share a block of chocolate. And it was like the best thing ever, having, a couple of little squares of chocolate, watching a movie together. We're allowed to stay up a little bit later. I was forming this belief system around the excitement for chocolate, that chocolate to me meant connection with my family. And so it made perfect sense that when I started to dive a little bit deeper around a chocolate addiction later on in life, I realized that chocolate meant connection to me. Another thing that I started to uncover through my journey as well is that I used to smoke cigarettes, and I started smoking from a very young age. I was actually 14 when I had my first cigarette, and I think I told my dad. I think I was probably around the age of 16, and he was a smoker as well. So as much as my mum absolutely hated smoking, or hated us smoking, Dad became my smoking buddy, and I'd moved out of home at the age of 16. So when I would come back to visit visit my parents, the times that, my dad would say to me, he'd go, "Oh, you want to go outside and check the weather?" And that was like code for let's go and have a cigarette together. And we would do all of our talking there. I got to ask him, how life has been. I got to talk to him about my experience, all sorts of things. We'd be out there for so long. We'd have a few cigarettes together, literally looking at the weather. I think I saw, the most amount of stars in my smoking days. And I felt so connected with my dad. And then it was a few years later, I think probably about 4 or 5 years after that, he announced that he was quitting smoking. And as much as I was, happy for him because, obviously the health reasons, I was kind of devastated inside because I'd lost my smoking buddy. And, my dad is such an incredible man. He's served in the Navy during the Vietnam War. He's lived an incredible life of service. And as much as I have a close relationship with him, we haven't had the closest of bond, being able to just talk very openly about things. He's quite a reserved man and keeps very, a lot to himself. And so these times where he'd open up and talk to me, when we'd smoke our cigarettes together, was the times that I really, really valued. And ultimately, the belief system that I was forming through that time is that, my connection with my dad only happens when we're smoking cigarettes together, because what were we going to do otherwise? I mean, look, we could have gone inside and just sat on the couch and had a cuppa and done that, but it's not the same. So later on in life, I realized, as I'd taken up smoking again in my, my later 20s, and even in my early 30s, I'm in my mid to late 30s now, in case you're wondering. Smoking for me was, subconsciously, so not in the forefront of my mind, but very, deeply programmed within me that, smoking meant connection. And so the times that I would reach for a cigarette was actually when I was really just desiring connection with someone else. And so by having awareness of these thoughts, I was able to start creating new ways of being, new habits, just changing my mindset around a lot of things. And when it comes back down, to intention, we need to start to look at, the behaviors that we have in our lives that are not serving us, that are not supporting the person that we want to become or the life that we want to be living. And so by having awareness that, our thoughts are, creating this reality, we start to really bring awareness to the fact that if we changed our thoughts, then we can change the world around us. And like I said, we might have some blocks in the road. And this is where, something like, as I mentioned in a previous episode, hypnotherapy can be really supportive. Psychotherapy is very supportive, coaching, counseling. There's many, many modalities out there to help us shift through old belief systems. But our intentions might be from a very subconscious place. Generally, we find that, if we're moving from a place of fear within, it's because we're trying to get away from something that we don't want to feel. And so when we just start to bring awareness to all of these things, we can really start to turn the light on what we call the shadow part of ourselves. So the shadow part is, the darker parts of us, the parts that we don't necessarily want to look at, the parts that we refuse to, acknowledge, or that have been in the closet for a little while. So the shadow work is where we dive into these parts and we pull them out, and then we realize that, they've had power over us all along. We shine a light on them and we completely take that power away. That's a different episode within itself. I digress. Coming back to, the power of intention is that I want to give you a few takeaways in this episode. So I want to give you a couple of questions that you can ask yourself just to start to bring awareness inwards. And this might take as little as 5 minutes in which you can start to change your mindset around certain things. So perhaps if you'd like to grab a journal at some point, sit down with a pen and just write these questions down. So what are the things that make me me? If I wasn't me, who would I be? What are the things I worry about? And how do I determine they're worth worrying about? So when you start to dive into some of these questions, you might start to notice there might be some visions coming up in your mind. There might be certain things that are popping to the forefront of your mind that you hadn't thought about. They're the things that are trying to make themselves known. They're the things that are being activated within you through your subconscious mind when you sit down to intentionally do this work. And the thing about these questions is when you start to turn the spotlight onto yourself, asking yourself these questions, it's basically like giving yourself a permission slip to go inwards and discover more about yourself. Because, I mean, the journey, especially through any sort of, personal development and spiritual development, ultimately, it's a journey of self-awareness. And the more we go inwards, the more we understand about ourselves, the more we understand about our lives, and the more that we can create change within ourselves and our lives if we feel that we need to do so. And so, I mean, I'm addicted to this work. I love this so much. I'm a self-awareness junkie, I guess you could say. And I love it. I love the fact that I have this awareness to then know what my values are, know that I can, create healthy boundaries in alignment with what my values are. And ultimately, I can say yes to the things that light me up. I can say no to the things that are not in alignment with essentially what I call my highest good. It could be your true north. It could be, your golden compass, whatever you choose to call it. But having awareness is, ultimately your ticket to freedom. When you understand who you are and you hold value for yourself and you act accordingly to how it is that you want to live your life, I promise you, everything starts to change. And honestly, the first step to growth is awareness. You'll hear me saying that a lot. So any amount of growth is going to require awareness, and self-awareness is, like I said, the key to unlocking freedom within. If you start to understand how your mind and your brain is wired to respond to certain things, if you start to understand what emotions are, why we have them, and what ultimately they're doing for us, if you understand how you got to where you are today, then essentially you can hack the system where you can create a new reality. So I'll repeat those questions again that you can just sit down and take your time to go through. So what are the things that make me me? If I wasn't me, who would I be? What are the things I worry about? And how do I determine they're worth worrying about? So only 4 questions there. They're quite the opportunity to, go quite deep. You might like to also finish off with, what is it that lights up my soul? Instead of focusing on, the shadow side or the darker parts, we really want to bring, light within ourselves. And so, checking in with you, what is it that just truly lights you up? And how often are you doing the things that light you up? How often are you being true to yourself, true to your word, true to your desires, true to your pleasure, true to all of the things that have such an incredible impact on you? So I'm going to leave this one here. I hope that's been supportive. Remembering as well that if you're enjoying these episodes, please feel free to comment, leave a review, and don't forget to share with your friends. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you in the next episode. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I hope you love the Enlightened podcast, and the biggest compliment you can give me is subscribing to this podcast, sharing it, and leaving a rating and review. Feel free to follow me on Instagram. My handle is @JenHamiltonOfficial, and the podcast handle is enlightened_podcast. You can also find the video version on YouTube on my channel. Just search Enlightened and don't forget to hit subscribe. Have a beautiful day and enjoy living the enlightened journey of life.